All right, welcome back, everyone. Today, we are taking a deep dive into something that is pretty important for anyone running a business, or honestly, anyone who is interested in the legal side of things. We're going to be talking about Employment Practices Liability Insurance in 2025.
EPL.
Exactly, EPL. You know, those lawsuits about discrimination, harassment, all that fun stuff that can go wrong in the workplace.
Yeah, all the things you hope never happen.
Exactly. So you shared with us a fascinating report on the 2025 EPL market outlook, and that's what we are going to break down today. And one of the things that really stood out to us was that things might be getting a little bit shaky.
Shaky. Yeah, I think the report uses a different word. Volatility.
Volatility. Okay. Yeah, that's one way to put it. Not exactly a word that inspires confidence.
No, not really. I mean, last year, premiums increased, but it was pretty modest. This year, though, it's a whole other story.
So why is 2025 looking so volatile for EPL? What's going on?
Well, there are a few big trends at play. But one of the biggest has got to be the rise of AI in the workplace. Obviously, AI has incredible potential, but it's also creating a whole new set of risks.
Especially when it comes to hiring.
Right.
Yeah. You know, one of the things that really jumped out at us when we were prepping for this deep dive was this idea that AI could actually make discrimination worse,
Yeah.
even though the goal is to be impartial.
Yep.
It's like this weird paradox where AI is supposed to eliminate bias, but it could actually end up amplifying it.
Exactly, because think about it, the data that's used to train these AI hiring systems often reflects existing societal biases
So the AI ends up learning those biases.
and perpetuating them, potentially excluding entire groups of people from job opportunities.
And that kind of discrimination on a huge scale, that would be a legal nightmare for companies, right?
Absolutely. We could be looking at a massive surge in EPL claims, which is why insurers are getting so nervous. It's a whole new level of risk they haven't had to deal with before.
So AI in hiring is definitely a red flag for 2025. What else is on the radar?
Well, another big shift is coming from the EEOC.
The Equal Employment Opportunity Commission.
Right. They just revamped their guidelines on workplace harassment for the first time in 25 years.
25 years. Wow. It's a major update.
Yeah.
So what kind of changes did they make?
Basically, they've broadened the definition of what constitutes harassment. It includes expanded protections for LGBTQI plus workers, more comprehensive coverage for pregnancy-related conditions, and even considerations for online harassment and issues that come up with remote work.
So it's not just about what we traditionally think of as harassment anymore. It's much broader.
Much broader. And that's where it gets tricky for employers. Behaviors that might not have been considered harassment before could now fall under that umbrella, which could lead to more lawsuits.
Sounds like employers really need to get up to speed on these new guidelines.
Absolutely. Having clearly defined policies and training programs is more crucial than ever.
Okay, so we've got AI and updated harassment guidelines. What else?
Well, there's also the growing trend of pay transparency laws. More and more states and cities are requiring companies to be much more open about how much they pay their employees.
Yeah, pay transparency is definitely having a moment.
It is. And while it's great for fairness, it also creates a new avenue for potential EPL claims.
How so?
Well, imagine a situation where pay discrepancies are revealed, and those discrepancies can be linked to protected characteristics like gender or race. That's a recipe for a discrimination lawsuit.
Yeah, it's like shining a light on existing inequalities. And I bet the EEOC is watching this trend closely.
Absolutely. Equal pay is a major focus for them, so they'll definitely be on the lookout for potential violations.
So we've got AI, new harassment guidelines, and pay transparency all potentially contributing to this EPL storm brewing in 2025.
Yeah.
Anything else we should be worried about?
Well, there's one more issue that could be even more explosive than the others: retaliation.
Oh, yeah, retaliation.
Yeah.
It's a bigger issue than a lot of people realize.
It is. Retaliation basically means punishing an employee for engaging in legally protected activity like reporting harassment or filing a discrimination complaint.
So let's say an employee reports something and then all of a sudden they're getting bad performance reviews or they get fired.
Yeah.
Could that be considered retaliation?
Absolutely. And the consequences can be really serious legal action damage to the company's reputation, employee morale, just a really toxic work environment.
Wow, it really does sound like a minefield. But is it really that common?
Unfortunately, yes, it's shockingly common. Actually, retaliation claims are the most common type of discrimination charge filed with the EEOC. We're talking over 56%. And just in 2024 alone, the EEOC filed over 40 lawsuits on behalf of employees who were retaliated against.
Over half of all discrimination charges are retaliation related.
That's a crazy stat.
It is, and it just shows how important it is for employers to understand what retaliation is and how to prevent it. Okay, so we've covered a lot. AI updated harassment guidelines, pay transparency, retaliation. It's a lot for businesses to keep track of. But before we move on, what are some practical steps our listeners can take right now to protect themselves and their businesses? Where do we even begin?
Well, the first thing is making sure your employee handbook is up to date, having clear language about discrimination, harassment, retaliation, and making sure it reflects the latest legal developments.
A lot of people are probably thinking like, oh, my handbook is fine, but...
Especially with those new EEOC guidelines on harassment.
Right.
You really got to make sure your policies are aligned with those updates. And it's not enough to just have the policies. You need to make sure employees actually understand them.
So education and awareness are key.
Absolutely. And don't forget about documentation. Every evaluation, every employee complaint, any disciplinary action or termination, all of that needs to be documented. It creates a paper trail that can protect you if a claim is filed.
Documentation, the golden rule of risk management.
Exactly. And it's not just about protecting yourself. It's about fairness and transparency for everyone involved.
Okay, so updated handbooks, training, and documentation. That's a good starting point. But I know there's a lot more to this EPL puzzle.
There is. We've only just scratched the surface.
Well, stay tuned, everyone, because in part 2 of this deep dive, we're going to zoom in on one area that's going to be especially important in 2025, the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. This one is definitely worth paying attention to.
So we've been talking about all these EPL risks heading into 2025, but let's zoom in on one area that I think is going to be super important to keep an eye on.
Okay, I'm all ears. What area are we talking about?
Pregnancy discrimination. See, back in 2022, Congress passed the Pregnant Workers Fairness Act, or PWFA for short.
The PWFA.
Yeah, it actually went into effect in June of 2023, and it's going to have a pretty big impact on employers moving forward.
The Pregnant Workers Fairness Act. I remember when that was making headlines, but to be honest, I haven't really thought about how it might apply to my own business. Can you give us a quick refresher on what the PWFA is all about?
Of course. So basically, the PWFA requires employers to provide reasonable accommodations for workers who are pregnant or have pregnancy-related medical conditions.
Okay.
It's kind of similar to the ADA, but specifically for pregnancy.
So if a pregnant employee needs, let's say, a stool to sit on while she's working, or more frequent breaks, things like that, the employer has to provide those accommodations.
Exactly. As long as the accommodations are considered reasonable, meaning they don't create an undue hardship for the employer. But the bar for what's considered undue hardship is pretty high.
So it's not just a simple yes or no to a request, right? There's a process involved.
Right. The PWFA really emphasizes this open communication between the employer and the employee. Both sides need to work together to find a solution that works for everyone. This is usually called the interactive process.
Got it. So how does this all tie back to EPL insurance and the potential risks businesses are facing?
Well, with any new law, there's going to be a learning curve, right? As employers figure out how to comply with the PWFA, we could see an uptick in lawsuits from employees who feel like they've been denied reasonable accommodations.
Right. It's like whenever there's a new law, everybody's trying to figure out where the lines are, and that can lead to legal challenges.
Exactly. And the PWFA is particularly complex because it overlaps with other laws like the Family and Medical Leave Act or FMLA, and also state-level pregnancy discrimination laws.
Sounds like a compliance headache for sure.
Yeah.
So what can employers do to kind of minimize their risk here?
Well, the first step is education, making sure everyone in the company, from managers and supervisors to HR, understands the law.
Yeah, don't just assume people will know about it.
Right. Be proactive. Provide resources, training sessions, and of course, document everything. Every request for accommodation, every conversation about the PWFA, it all needs to be documented.
Documentation. Always cover your bases.
Yeah.
So let's say an employee requests an accommodation. How does an employer actually determine what's reasonable?
Well, that's where that interactive process comes in. You need to have that open dialogue with the employee exploring different options. What's reasonable for one employer might not be reasonable for another. It depends on the nature of the job, the size of the company, the resources they have available.
So there's no one-size-fits-all answer here.
Nope. Every situation is unique, which is why it's so important to have those clear policies in place, provide training, and really engage in that interactive process with your employees. It can help prevent those costly and time-consuming lawsuits down the road.
Okay, so we've talked about the PWFA in isolation, but you mentioned earlier how it intersects with other laws like the FMLA. Can you walk us through how those two laws work together?
Sure. So the FMLA allows eligible employees to take up to 12 weeks of unpaid job-protected leave for certain family and medical reasons.
Okay.
Things like the birth of a child or a serious health condition.
And I'm guessing pregnancy complications would fall under that serious health condition umbrella.
Exactly. So the FMLA might cover time off, but the PWFA is about accommodations while the employee is still working. And these two laws can actually work together to provide a more complete safety net for pregnant workers.
So, for example, an employee might take FMLA leave for part of her pregnancy and then return to work with accommodations provided under the PWFA.
Exactly. But navigating both laws can get really tricky, which is why it's important to have a deep understanding of both and maybe even involve legal counsel to make sure you're in compliance.
Right. A misstep with either one could lead to an EPL claim.
Absolutely. But remember, it's not just about the legal risks. There's also the reputational damage that can come from being seen as discriminatory against pregnant workers. In today's world, attracting and retaining top talent is crucial, and a company's reputation for fairness plays a big role in that.
That's a good point. A discrimination lawsuit, regardless of the outcome, can really hurt a company's image. So taking these steps to prevent lawsuits isn't just about legal protection. It's about protecting your company's brand.
Exactly. And it's not just about avoiding negative publicity. Creating a workplace that truly supports pregnant workers can have a ton of positive benefits, like increased morale, productivity, and loyalty.
It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels valued and supported.
Exactly. So I think it's helpful to look at the PWFA not just as a legal obligation, but as an opportunity to build a more equitable and inclusive workplace for everyone.
Yeah, it seems like all these EPL issues we've been discussing, from AI to harassment to pay transparency to the PWFA, they're all really about more than just avoiding lawsuits. It's about creating a workplace culture that is fair, respectful, and inclusive.
Couldn't agree more. And I think that's a powerful takeaway for our listeners.
Absolutely. It's not just about ticking boxes and following the rules. It's about creating a workplace where everyone feels safe, valued, and empowered. But even with the best of intentions, there are still so many areas where things can go wrong, especially when it comes to employment law.
That's right. Even if you're doing everything you can to create a positive and supportive work environment, there are still some fundamental legal requirements that you can't overlook. And one area that we see trip up even the most well-meaning employers is wage and hour compliance.
Wage and hour compliance. You mean things like making sure employees are getting paid correctly for overtime or that they're taking their required breaks?
Exactly.
Yeah.
You might think those issues are small potatoes compared to something like a sexual harassment lawsuit, but they can really add up and lead to some hefty fines.
So even a company that's on top of things when it comes to discrimination and harassment could still get in trouble for wage and hour violations.
Absolutely. And we've seen a real surge in these types of lawsuits lately, partly due to increased awareness of worker rights and the rise of the gig economy.
That makes sense. With so many people working as independent contractors these days, there's a lot more room for confusion about things like wages and hours.
You hit the nail on the head. Misclassification is a huge issue. We're seeing more and more companies trying to classify workers as independent contractors to avoid things like paying benefits or complying with certain labor laws. But if those workers are found to be misclassified, the employer could be on the hook for back wages, penalties, legal fees. It can be a real financial nightmare.
Wow, that does sound risky. So how can employers make sure they're classifying workers correctly and following all those wage and hour laws?
Well, first and foremost, understand the tests used to determine whether a worker is an employee or an independent contractor. These tests can be complicated and they vary from state to state.
Sounds like it might be a good idea to consult with an expert on that one.
Definitely. Don't try to go it alone on this.
Right.
And be proactive. Don't wait for a lawsuit to happen. Conduct regular audits to make sure you're in compliance. It can save you a lot of headaches in the long run.
Regular audits, always a good idea.
Yeah.
But let's say a company has classified their workers correctly. What else do they need to be doing to make sure they're on the right side of those wage and hour laws?
There's a whole checklist of things. First, make sure you're paying your employees correctly for all the hours they work, including overtime. Understand the rules around meal and rest breaks, and make sure your employees are actually taking those breaks as required by law. Keep accurate time records. Make sure you're calculating and paying overtime correctly. Be careful about deductions from paychecks. Certain deductions, like for uniforms or tools, can actually be illegal if they bring in employees' wages below minimum wage.
Sounds like there are a lot of potential pitfalls.
There are, and the consequences of violations can be serious. We're talking back, wages, liquidated damages, civil penalties, even criminal prosecution in some cases.
Criminal prosecution, that's serious.
It is. Wage and hour compliance is not something to mess around with. You need those clear policies, comprehensive training, regular audits. It's really the only way to protect yourself and your business.
It's not just about protecting the company either. It's about ensuring that employees are being treated fairly in accordance with the law.
Exactly. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of EPL risk management that we often see overlooked.
Oh, what's that?
It's something that can be a little harder to define, but it's incredibly important. Workplace culture. You see, even if a company has all the right policies and procedures in place, if the overall workplace culture is toxic or disrespectful, it can create a breeding ground for EPL claims.
Workplace culture being a breeding ground for lawsuits. That makes sense. But how can a company actually assess its workplace culture and figure out if there are problems?
There are a few key things to watch out for. High employee turnover can be a sign that something's not right. Lots of complaints, whether they're formal or informal, are another red flag. And of course, any patterns of discrimination, harassment, or retaliation need to be taken seriously.
So it's about paying attention to the signals, both the obvious ones and the more subtle ones.
Exactly. And it's not just about identifying problems, it's about creating a culture where employees feel comfortable speaking up if they see something wrong. That means having open lines of communication, clear reporting procedures, and a zero-tolerance policy for retaliation.
It's about creating that culture of trust where people feel safe and know they'll be heard.
You got it. And that all starts at the top. Leaders need to set the tone. They need to model respectful behavior, promote open communication, and take action when they see misconduct.
Actions speak louder than words, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it's not just about words and actions. It's about creating a real sense of belonging and inclusion. It's about valuing diversity and making sure everyone feels respected and appreciated for who they are and what they bring to the table.
Creating a workplace where everyone feels like they can thrive.
That's it, exactly. And that's not just good for employees. It's good for business, too. Companies with strong, positive workplace cultures tend to have higher morale, lower turnover, and better overall performance.
It sounds like a win-win.
It really is.
Well, we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into the world of EPL insurance and risk management. As we wrap things up, what are the key takeaways for our listeners? What do they really need to remember?
I think the biggest takeaway is that EPL risk management isn't just about following the rules. It's about creating a workplace culture where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. And that requires a more holistic approach. Everything from clear policies and procedures to effective training to a positive and supportive work environment.
Well said. And it's probably safe to say that the EPL landscape is going to keep evolving in the coming years. Staying informed and being proactive is going to be more important than ever.
Absolutely. And remember, knowledge is power. The more you understand about the potential risks and how to handle them, the better prepared you'll be to navigate this complex and ever-changing world.
Great advice. So for all of our listeners out there, stay informed, stay proactive, and stay tuned, because we'll have more deep dives into the world of business and risk management coming soon.
And before we go, don't forget to ask yourself, what can you do today to create a more positive and equitable workplace?
That's a great question to leave everyone with. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those EPL claims at bay.
You know, we were talking about workplace culture and how it can really make or break you when it comes to EPL.
Right. You were saying that even if a company has all the right policies on paper, if the actual culture is a mess, it's like a ticking time bomb.
Totally. It's like you're just asking for trouble.
So how can a company really take a step back and assess its workplace culture? Figure out if there's any red flags they need to address.
Well, there are some telltale signs. High employee turnover, for example, that's often a sign that something's not right.
Makes sense.
Lots of complaints, whether they're formal or just people grumbling around the water cooler, that's another red flag.
Yeah.
And then, of course, any patterns of discrimination, harassment, retaliation. Those are serious issues that need to be addressed immediately.
It's like you need to be paying attention to all those signals, the obvious ones and the subtle ones, that something might be off.
Exactly. And it's not just about identifying the problems. It's about creating a culture where people feel safe speaking up when they see something wrong. That means open communication, clear reporting procedures, and a strict zero-tolerance policy for retaliation.
It's about building that trust so people know they can come forward without fear of repercussions.
Exactly. And that starts at the top.
Right.
Leadership needs to set the tone. They need to walk the walk, talk the talk model, respectful behavior, encourage open dialogue, and take swift action if there's any misconduct.
Lead by example, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But it goes beyond just words and actions. It's about creating a real sense of belonging and inclusion, valuing diversity in all its forms, and making sure everyone feels respected and appreciated for who they are and what they bring to the table.
It's about creating a workplace where everyone can truly thrive.
Precisely. And that's not just good for employees, it's good for business too.
Yeah.
Companies with strong, positive workplace cultures tend to have higher morale, lower turnover, better productivity and performance.
It's a win-win for everyone. So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into EPL insurance and all the risks that come with it. As we wrap up, what are the big takeaways you want our listeners to walk away with?
I think the most important thing to remember is this EPL risk management isn't just about checking boxes and following the rules. It's about building a workplace where everyone feels safe, respected, and valued. And that requires a more holistic approach. Clear policies, effective training, a positive and supportive work environment, all of it working together.
It's not just about the legal stuff. It's about creating a company culture that truly supports its people.
Exactly. And as we head into 2025, remember the EPL landscape is constantly evolving, so stay informed, stay proactive, and stay ahead of the curve.
Knowledge is power. The more you know about the risks and how to handle them, the better off you'll be.
Couldn't agree more. So as we close out this deep dive, I want to leave you with this question. What can you do today to make your workplace a little bit better, a little bit fairer, a little bit more inclusive?
That's a great question for everyone to think about. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive into the world of EPL insurance. Until next time, keep learning, keep growing, and keep those EPL claims at bay.